Well, it seems the U.S. under a Biden administration is trying to ramp up the old Cold War with Russia again. I'm old enough to remember when Joe Biden was a part of an administration which thought that the idea, of some kind of new Cold War with Russia was straight out of the 1980s. After all, by 2012, we were no longer dealing with the Soviet Union. We were dealing with a very different country. Vladimir Putin's Russia, whatever you have to say about it, was not the Soviet Union of old. Yet for some reason, elements of the national security state decided to make Putin and the Russians sort of the scapegoat for the election of Donald Trump, because I guess, you can't blame Hillary, because then Hillary wouldn't like that. So they had to come up with somebody and say that they can't say that Trump won because Hillary was so bad. They can't say that Trump won because Hillary was a bad candidate. All they have to do is blame it on somebody else, and they decided to blame Russia. And so now all of a sudden the new Cold War that the Republicans and the Republican base was pushing for many years, including when Obama was in office. It was a big scandal when Obama, who was the president above Vice President Joe Biden, when he said to Dmitry Medvedev, that after the election he was going to have a lot more flexibility in dealing with Russia, and Dmitry said, hey, I will transmute that to Vladimir. And it sounds very ominous, doesn't it? Obama, it sounds like, was some kind of secret undercover Russian agent who was trying to deceive the American people when he was really wanting to be some big buddy with Putin. That was how the right, as odd as it seems, that's how the right used to think in this country. Now it's completely flipped. The Biden administration is now, they're now the ones who are trying to prop up Russia as some kind of big threat. And they're blaming Russia for some hack that occurred last year. It was the SolarWinds hack. I never really talked much about the whole SolarWinds thing. You can look into it. It was, I think, some kind of like cloud services that a lot of the federal government was using. Turns out their main server had, the password was like SolarWinds123. So anybody could have guessed that and gotten into the system, and inevitably it was, hacked by somebody, and they did nefarious things, I guess. Well, that the intelligence community decided to blame on Russia. They didn't cite any evidence. Of course, evidence is always classified, but we're just supposed to, believe the intel folks, the spooks, that this was all Russia. And so now, because Russia did this horrible thing to us, because we know that that's what Russians do, the U.S. is going to have to retaliate against them with their own cyber attacks. And this is what the New York Times is being told by their anonymous sources, that the U.S. is about to carry out a bunch of cyber attacks against Russia. Now, according to the anonymous sources, these are not going to be attacks that are going to be visible to the public, but it's something that will send a message to Putin and his military generals. They'll notice them. So I guess they're going to be hacking into some kind of military government, systems, I guess is what they're talking about. It seemed odd to me that they would leak this beforehand. If anything, I would think that they would leak it afterwards and sort of claim responsibility anonymously. Because when you do this, I would think that you're giving the Russians too much of a heads up if you really intended on doing this. But the fact that they're saying that the public wouldn't notice and that it would be something just to really send a message to the people inside the government means one of two things. It means either they don't plan on attacking anything that, affects civilian life, which, if that's the case, I don't really care. Go ahead and hack the Russian military all you want. It doesn't really matter to me. I'm not too offended by that from an anti-war perspective. You're not. It's as pure state-on-state crime as you can imagine. It's only affecting state actors, not really affecting individual people. You're not harming innocent civilians. So, I mean, if they want to have their little spat with Russia over the internet be my guest. On the other hand, I generally think that it's a really, really bad, stupid, and dangerous thing to antagonize a nuclear power in any way. So that's the other part of this. If this was, Iran or Venezuela or something, I could be totally indifferent to the U.S. wanting to, do their little cyber hack thing if it was truly something that civilians would never notice. But when it's Russia, that's getting a little dangerous, because Russia, China, India, Pakistan, France, all these countries, and North Korea, all these countries have their own nuclear weapons. And it's imperative that every nuclear power on the planet gets along. It's not okay for nuclear powers to be on bad terms with one another, because that just puts you a few steps closer to the possibility that a war could someday break out between two nuclear powers, and that's something that absolutely can never be allowed to happen. It would be, the end of civilization. It's bad enough that we have to worry about India and Pakistan both having nuclear weapons, considering that they regularly sort of have spats with one another, but have stopped short of total war since, developing each of them independently a nuclear deterrent. So it's the U.S., if they're trying to be the responsible players in the room, they want to be the adults in the room, the last thing they need to be doing is antagonizing other nuclear powers and creating more problems. The U.S. should be working with Russia and China and France and North Korea to try and minimize the risk of any sort of nuclear conflict between India and Pakistan. I mean, if you really want to talk about things that really worry me militarily, I'm not worried about China taking over the world. I'm much more worried about India and Pakistan destroying the world. I covered the most, what I believe is the most recent scare, military scare, nuclear scare, I guess, between India and Pakistan, which was a couple of years ago now, I think, on this channel, probably back in 2019. And so I think that there is absolutely zero room for the U.S. to be doing anything other than trying to de-escalate tension with other nuclear powers. Accusing Russia of hacking into this very unsecure system without evidence and then proceeding to engage in some sort of retaliatory action, to me, is just not the smartest thing in the world. And maybe I'd be a little more forgiving, since this is supposed to be kind of a tit-for-tat sort of move. Maybe I'd be a bit more forgiving if I had any faith in the U.S. intelligence community. But the fact of the matter is they lie. And if publicly the intelligence community is telling us, "Oh, Russia did this, just trust us," I'm not going to trust them. And so, for all I know, they're just using this as an excuse to wage their cyber attacks on Russia. And if that's the case, if this isn't truly a retaliation for something Russia did, that is going to increase tensions with a nuclear power. To me, Russia should be one of the easier countries to deal with and trying to get them to stop, or to not ever use nukes. Right up there with France. As far as I'm concerned, that should be the first country on the list that you sort of cross off any risk of ever, using nukes, because Putin seems pretty open to not wanting to use nukes. The U.S. and Russia in the past have, signed a lot of treaties that were meant to limit the risk of nuclear war. Even going back to the days of the Soviet Union, when you had, the First SALT Treaty. Forging a lasting peace with Russia seems like low-hanging fruit in terms of foreign policy. It seems like something that would be really easy to do if the people controlling our regime were driven by sort of objective goals of national interest, rather than the interests of defense contractors and other lobbyists who benefit from the U.S. Constantly being, I guess, in a new Cold War with Russia. Because to me, seems like a pretty common thing. Hey, you befriend Russia, it accomplishes multiple goals. One, it takes the risk of any sort of nuclear conflict with Russia off the table because they're your friend now. Two, Russia gets along well with China, Pakistan, North Korea, and it helps you sort of start to build bridges with those countries. The U.S. already had, pretty close relationship with Pakistan. The U.S. is very friendly with India. And maybe, having Russia on the side would allow both of them, because historically Russia's had, a lot of contact with those countries too. Makes it easier maybe to try and get both of them to walk down on the ledge. Maybe try and start reducing their nuclear capacity, like SALT or START treaties for India and Pakistan. That would be something that would be very beneficial. And of course, if you get Russia and maybe to a lesser extent China to be friendly with you, that'll give you a little better room to try and go into North Korea and talk them down off the ledge. If the Russians maybe are, trying to talk to the North Koreans too, and tell them, hey, if you give up your nukes, the United States will not come in and mow you down. Tell Kim Jong-un you're not going to get Gaddafi'd. And in the process, maybe start to open up North Korea so that, maybe it won't be a paradise, but if it could at least be only as bad as China, then that would be a huge win for the people of North Korea and for world peace. So compared to all that, hacking Russia because they guessed your really obvious password, SolarWinds123, if they even did that, seems pretty darn petty. So with that said, I think I'll leave things off here for today.